Where in the world should I buy a home in the greater Houston metro? We have so many choices here. We have so many suburbs that you guys know, like, and love on this channel, whether you're local here to Texas or you are abroad in various states around the US. You've seen some of the videos like this one on my channel, trying to break down what you can expect when you're moving here in some places that may be a better fit for you than others. And it has to be the number one question that I get asked on a day in and day out basis. So in this video, we're going to deep dive. We're going to go around some of my favorite suburbs. We're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of being in different areas. And hopefully by the end of this video, you know exactly where you want to be. If that sounds good, stay tuned. And so the very first thing that I ask when someone says, "Hey, Aaron, where should I move?" The very first thing I asked is, what is your actual relationship to Houston? Are you going to be someone that needs to be in the mix? Do you have a job that is located in the heart of Houston? Do you plan on going to all these festivals and sporting events and concerts? Do you want to be at the bayou often? What do you want to do? And how does it relate to your relationship with Houston? Once we kind of have that ironed out, we can really start to talk about some neighborhoods that do a better job than others in relations to a commute in and out of Houston, right? Not all neighborhoods are created the same. For those of you that don't know, we live in Meridiana, so that's the blue dot down there. But this is, if not the straightest shot from anywhere that is currently building new construction in and out of Houston, right? This distance looks about the same as Katy, but with the experience that I have, I can tell you that this is 30 minutes shorter than this drive right here, right? So once we know what you plan on doing in Houston, what your lifestyle plans on being, we can really break down and really narrow down the focus of what you're going to need from this city of Houston. But before we even get into that, think of Houston as a bunch of circles that you can almost perfectly cut in quarters. Okay, so northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast, all broken up by I-10, which basically cuts it in half, east to west. 45, which basically cuts it in half, north to south. And on the southern end, south of I-10, you have 288, which basically cuts it down north to south at I-10. So you'll get this little conversion of little circles. Then you'll have the Beltway 8. Then if you zoom out a little bit more, you'll have 99. And in some areas, you'll have 6. But it's basically just concentric circles that just kind of work on top of themselves. When looking at one of the most confusing things I'll say is someone that's not from here and didn't grow up knowing, you know, this was the Beltway, this is the North Freeway, this is the Grand Parkway. I didn't grow up here, and I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You basically had I-10, and then you had a bunch of little country stuff that you just kind of know the names: Airline Highway, Florida Boulevard. You just kind of know those main 3 or 4 major streets. But here is just so many interstates, so many loops, so many interchanges, and they all have specific names. I don't even know the names. I'm gonna be honest with you. I go by the numbers. So, but there are some buzzwordy kind of things that you need to know to make this transition a little bit easier. The first thing is when you hear somebody reference the loop, they are talking about the innermost loop of Houston. That is the 610 loop. In there, that's going to be a mix of more established communities like the Heights, some more affluent areas like your Uptown, your Galleria, Upper Kirby is probably kind of like the Rodeo Drive of Houston. It's just really affluent mansions basically on every street. And then you're going to also have a good mix of gentrifying areas that are kind of up and coming right now. And so that would include places like your Edo, some parts of Fifth Ward. You're going to have some parts of Independence Heights. You're going to have some parts like Shady Acres. You're going to have some parts like Medical Center South, which is kind of up in this little area. You're going to have a bunch of mix, but it's basically going to be less deed restricted It's going to be housing that is a little bit more on top of each other, and it's going to be kind of a hodgepodge. The city is really a hodgepodge. You can be in the Heights, which is one of the more coveted areas in the middle of the city, and you can be in the Heights and you can have a multi-million-dollar house on side of an old bungalow that looks like it's on its last leg, and a windstorm could knock that thing down. And then you'll hop on over to the River Oaks area, and it is just all pristine. It's all just nice. Even the older stuff just looks well maintained and well cared for. Same with some of the memorial areas. And then you'll get to some of these places like in that third ward, kind of Edo slash East End, where East End is going to be more character. It's going to be more of a reclaimed bungalow sort of neighborhood, where a lot of the Edo sort of area is going to be an old kind of warehouse district that has now been converted to a lot of single family townhome style homes, as we call them here in Houston. And so the city of Houston is truly just a hodgepodge mix of different types of housing, from mansions to townhomes to ranches to whatever you want. Most of your big multifamily homes are going to be here. So you have really big apartments. You have some stuff that's some high rise stuff. You have stuff that's kind of all over that mix. But if you're looking inside of this loop, it is going to be a more urban feel. You're going to have, you're going to have just some things that the suburbs don't necessarily deal with. You're going to maybe have a little bit more loitering in some of these areas. You're going to have a little bit more crime in this area. You're going to have a little bit more break-ins. You're going to have some things just in the city because you're so on top of each other, and the haves and the have-nots of the world are so close to each other. Prime example of kind of like where we used to live, where our current rental is in the Independence Heights area. We lived in a pretty, I would say, well-developed area between Independence Heights. You had Shepherd Park kind of plaza over here, and then you have Independence Heights, and then you have some other stuff kind of in that north side sort of area. If you go to the Shepherd Park Plaza side, you can have 700 to multi-million-dollar houses, and walking distance from those houses could be a trailer park. And it's just like, I can see the mansion. I know that people over here are doing better, but from their front door, I can see that trailer park, right? And that is Houston in a nutshell. It's going to be turn by turn, case by case. Is this section good? Is this something that I feel comfortable with? And you have to ask yourself that all the time. In the midst of that, before we get to that next ring, what you're seeing is kind of like many of the suburbs are doing now, where there was an established place out in the suburbs that people know, like, and love. A lot of those communities have sold out at this point, and you're starting to see little townships around them that maybe weren't as nice or weren't as developed or weren't as affluent. You're starting to see developments pop up in there. The city does a similar thing. So with the Heights kind of being the who's who, the Montroses being kind of like the who's of the city, you start seeing the uptowns of the city. You start to see these little areas pop up, like Acres Homes, Spring Branch, the Medical Center South. You'll start to see these kind of things pop up in these areas. And I know they don't really get much shine on the channel because that's just not what most of my clients are looking for. But I do have tons of clients that I've helped buy these townhomes, or they've bought a duplex, or they've just bought investment properties. This is the center of the city. Is kind of more of the easygoing sort of vibe. You're gonna kind of overlook some things. That's what living in Houston is like, in my opinion. As you get to the next circle, which is Beltway 8, that's when Houston starts to really kind of take that transition approach to, this is where suburbs just kind of start, in my opinion. And so in this little ring, about halfway between the loop and halfway between the Beltway, that's where you start to see these established communities in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s that start to pop up and kind of dominate what and set the trend for what Houston is basically going to become. Some of the more affluent ones are kind of going out towards some of our more popular suburbs now. This is Hunters Creek Village is kind of like its own thing. It's just super affluent, winding roads, super pretty mansions, just humongous homes back there. This little Bunker Hill kind of area is just gorgeous, 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 gorgeous. But that's what you start to see as you kind of fan out from Houston, where it's super populated, everybody's close together. You may have a house where you can touch your house and your neighbor's house, and I'm not that long of a wingspan, and most of the houses in Houston you can kind of do that. As you kind of fan out a little bit more and you get in between the Beltway, which is the 8, and the 610 loop, it gets more traditionally suburban. In this pocket of the world, you have a mix of what seems to have happened was there was kind of a condo boom. So you have condos and townhomes. You have a boom of a specific look and a specific era in this little ring of Houston, in addition to what we would consider like traditional standard suburb sort of housing. And that occurs in this little ring of the Beltway. And so just between those two little jumps, between the 610 loop and the Beltway, there's so much variety of houses. Before we even get to talking about moving out to the suburbs, we first got to see if those are a good fit for you, because I do have some clients that move in. Some haven't gotten to that phase of life yet where they've started a family. It may just be them and their partner. They haven't had kids yet. So, some of the other issues that we'll talk about kind of later in the video when it comes to like schools, for example, or just the diversity, for example, or some of the other demographics of not necessarily being so old. You want something that's kind of in the mix and a little bit more popping. For right now, the suburbs aren't going to give you that. So we're looking in here for you. You have those people that aren't really quite ready to make that transition out to the deep burbs. They kind of want to be in the mix, but they also want that family neighborhood that's a little bit safer, a little bit more quiet. Then we got some stuff in here that we can play with, right? So your relationship to Houston, what it means to you, how ease of access, how important is that to you? That all kind of dominates which ring we even start looking in. Breaking it back even further, there's a semi ring 6 that hasn't quite made its way all the way around Houston, but it also basically is a little $50 around Houston. And so from basically the north, from the almost spring area, you can see it kind of cutting through here. Partially it's not official, but there's a county road that cuts through and touches 6 here. And then 6 basically goes all the way down to the coast. That's more of the same. It gets another little mix of, I have a lot of clients that'll get some older kind of condo-y, townhomey sort of things in this little stretch as well. And then there's a lot of more desirable residential communities that have popped up in this ring because they started to get tied to some really good school districts. So as you get along this ring, you see the really big push for some of these are tied to Katy ISD, some of these are tied to Sci-Fair ISD, some of these are tied to some of the more affluent Fort Bend schools. And so you really see that an even deeper push for that residential lifestyle as you go even further out and you're out on 6. We back out a little bit more. So you see, we just keep building circles on top of circles on top of circles here. You go out a little bit more, and 99 has been, from what Native said, the project that's been going on for 20 plus years. I don't know how accurate that is. I've only been here for 10. And I know that within the 10 that I was here, I believe they finished this section here, and I believe they finished some of this section. And so what that has basically done, and I think they are going to basically do this section because there's a couple communities that are publicized and that is going to tie into 99. So I think it's going to eventually kind of make its way around and be another way to get to the Texas City area. But what I've seen is that this the invention of this has basically made it to where you could get now from Katy to Dayton without having to do a bunch of weird things, or from Katy to Richmond Rosenberg without having to do a bunch of weird things, or from the Woodlands to Katy Richmond Rosenberg without having to do a bunch of weird things like go to 45, then go to 10, then go to that connection point, and the development along it has been crazy since we've moved here in 2015. A lot of these communities are now self-sufficient. They're going to have their own hospitals. They're going to have their own grocery stores. They got their own restaurants. They got their own entertainment. They have their own movie theaters. And a lot of that is along this 99 border here, which basically surrounds 75% of Houston at this point. And in addition to that interstate access, now all of these communities that would have been in the middle of nowhere now can say we have access to the airport, we have access to downtown, we have access to neighboring suburbs. And so the completion to this point of what 99 has been to the Houston metro is the access point that everybody basically has needed to make these communities sustainable. And as a result, Houston has become the master plan capital of the world. All of our top selling master plan communities are basically along this little outer 6 to 99 ring. So you got your Ellisons, you got your Bridgelands, you have your Dunham Points, you have your Town Lakes, which is right here. You have, if you go up a little bit further, you got your Artavillas, you got your Evergreens, you have the Highlands, you have your Woodson Reserve. You have so many that just kind of are hanging around that outer loop. But now that you have access to the neighboring suburbs and a way to get to another interstate system to get you into Houston, it has really just made this area boom. So just getting started, right? New construction is literally about everywhere. Once you get outside of this 699, you can, like I tell many of my people that hit me up, throw a dart at a map of Houston and you'll probably hit a new construction development. And it's only going to keep getting further and further out. I've had clients that have closed out here in Alvin. I've had people that have closed out here in Angleton. I've had people in Richmond Rosenberg. I've had people in Katy, Hockley, Magnolia, Conroe, New Caney. Not quite Dayton and Mount Bellevue yet, but those are one of the few that I've never had someone buy in yet at this point. And so Houston is growing, man, and it's often tough to narrow it down based on a couple different factors, because a lot of the same builders go to all of these communities, or a lot of these communities, or some of these developers are the same. So some of the makeup of the community feels and looks about the same. And so this is when you lean on someone like myself that has dealt with most of these communities and say, okay, this is my lifestyle. This is what I plan to do. This is where I plan to be. Help me narrow it down. But before we even get into that more layered question, what you got to know is south of I-10, pretty flat, and north of I-10 is much greener. And you can see that on the satellite map. So as you go specifically towards some of the more beloved places in Houston, when people say they want to be somewhere that's super green, they typically are referring to the Woodlands, where it's a city that is basically encapsulated by trees, mature trees all around the entire development. Some of the communities in Conroe are emulating that to basically be the baby woodlands. Humble has that. New Caney has that. The Splendora area has that in some areas. So most of your pretty lush green communities are going to be north of I-10. When you get out to the far west and you going far south, you'll see a lot of like old cattle pastures, or you'll see a lot of old ranches that have now kind of been converted. That land has been sold to developers over the years, and those have become the Ellisons of the world, the Meridianas of the world, the Jordan Ranch, literally in the name. Those have become the new communities. And all of those, again, are basically surrounding this outer ring right now. So as we go into the next layer of kind of what do you want to see, what do you want to be around, the first question I have is, okay, what do you plan on doing? Are you someone that travels a lot? Do you fly internationally? Do you want to be by water? Like, what do you want to do? Because with the makeup of how Houston is, the Bush International Airport, which is probably everyone's more preferred because you get more direct flights out of there, is up in this North Houston sort of vibe, right? As you move further and further away from that, so basically all of the new construction stuff that's over here is like 45 minutes away. For me to get to Bush from my neighborhood is every bit of an hour with no traffic. So how much do you plan on traveling? How much do you plan on being in and out of Houston where you have to take a flight to get somewhere? That's going to be important, because I don't care how great the house is, if you travel out of state twice a month, that is going to be super annoying to you to have to either take a connecting flight and hobby somewhere or be forced to drive an hour. So that may, even though we love Meridiana, it may not be right for you to be our neighbor because your lifestyle doesn't justify you being it. Another thing that I come across is people that'll be like, oh man, we want to move down there because we want to be, in Galveston all the time. And I'm just like, okay, that sounds cool. But that means that all of these neighborhoods that you came to my channel on are probably over an hour away from Galveston. So you're telling me you want to buy a house up here in Conroe and make this drive after a long day of work, or on a weekend? Even still, if it is a weekend, you want to go out here, sit in the sun all day, be drained, and then make an hour and a half drive all the way back up to Conroe. So that may eliminate some options for you. So that's the secondary question that we kind of have to ask ourselves: what do you actually plan on doing outside of the city of Houston? What do you plan on actually doing here? And the two eliminators are usually the people that most often are people that want to be kind of close to Galveston and deal with the Kima to Galveston kind of ring of activities where we have all this water, or they're the people that want to be close to either Lake Conroe, or they want to be close to Lake Houston. And we basically have to look at that cone and say, are you willing to drive an hour plus for those things? And that oftentimes will eliminate even some of the best communities, just because the access to get there isn't really great. The next thing that people always say is, I don't want to be by somewhere that floods. And unfortunately, there's nowhere that is 100% safe in Houston from flooding. But to show you that, let's hop on the maps on HAR, because we have some tools on my end that I can look at and see if something is more flood prone than others that you as the general public, I think they've given you access to, but it's not as detailed as I can see on my end. So let's hop on over into HAR and let me show you what I mean. All right, so hopping into HAR, this is the tool that when you go into HAR app or you go into har.com, you'll have access to see things in real time. It's the most accurate and up-to-date listings for anything that is published online in Houston. But using some of the most popular locations, for example, this North Katy to Cypress kind of cone, let's use that as an example of when someone says they don't want to be in a flood zone. Let's see what that means. Okay. And very quickly, you can see, so for reference, 99 is cutting through here. You can see that from a floodplain, some of these areas that are the most beloved, the most well known, are near existing floodplains or are actively in existing floodplains. The one thing that people don't often know, or the general public doesn't often know, is as a result of what occurred in Harvey, these developers, if they're putting a home in a floodplain or a floodway, if they're doing that, they have to build your house out of that flood level to get you to an X zone. Otherwise, they have to pay for insurance until the neighborhood has that rating. And most of the builders don't want to do that. So what you'll see is when these are developing, or if you go out there and look at the Bridgeland area right now, if you're going through some of those sections, you're going to see tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of dirt to bring this up to an elevation that is going to be higher to pull you up out of this 100-year floodplain. Harvey did a lot of things to this area. It devastated a lot of areas. But one of the best things that came out of what happened to Harvey, or happened as a result of Harvey, was that the flood mitigation in these neighborhoods, so the extra retention ponds, the extra lakes, yes, they have a dual purpose of being walking trails and nature and all of those things, but the reality is the additional lakes, the additional retention ponds, having your house be up higher on the slab, having your house be further back up your driveway, all of those things were a result of kind of like building codes to sell in the Houston metro as a result of what occurred to Harvey. So some people would look at this map and be like, "Oh my God, get Bridgeland off of my list. I don't want to be anywhere near that purple." But if you look at a lot of these new construction communities now, you got some purple vein in Bayou. And the developers, as a result, like I said, not everybody knows this. As a result of Harvey, there's mitigation that they have to give you in order to sell the house to the general public, or they have to foot the bill into until that rating has been changed to get you out of that floodplain. And so all of your again beloved communities, we go and do a scan. I can just call some out. We can, your Jordan Ranches over here, we got your Siennas over here, we got your Meridianas over here. A lot of these are very close to what would have been considered a floodplain, because we have so many lakes, streams, creeks, reservoirs that just connect throughout Houston. You can be very far away from this, but there could be a stream coming off Lake Houston that just has to touch somewhere in Tomball, right? There's nowhere, as we scroll in, there's nowhere that is just really safe. We look at this, we back out. There's nothing close to Tomball. We zoom in. Oh my gosh, there's how many streams and creeks and little unknown rivers that as you're just driving around your neighborhood and you're going over bridges, and there's a little bit of a placard of this is Sleeping Hollow River that you don't even think about. And all of these basically surround communities and are running through communities no matter where you are, no matter where the price point. But you have to keep in mind that as a result of Harvey, don't be freaked out. The likelihood of, and I tell my clients to get in flood insurance no matter where they are. We are currently out in the X zone. We got flood insurance. I tell my clients to get flood insurance no matter where you are, but the likelihood of your home actually flooding in a new construction community is very low as a result of what occurred during Harvey. Like I said, extra uh, extra drainage, extra retention ponds, extra lakes, um, house being further back, house being further up on the slab. There's just things that would a lot would have to go wrong for a new construction community to flood out. And we hope that we never see a flood or we never see a rain event that is that bad, because then the whole city of Houston really has a problem at that point. Everybody's got problems at that point. If we get something that's worse than Harvey or double the size of Harvey, everybody is going to be struggling. But in terms of the disasters that we have seen, these neighborhoods are built to withstand a little worse than Harvey. Okay. And Harvey was pretty bad. It rained in some spots for like 7 days. That's nonstop. That is one of those things where if that does that anywhere in the world, I think that creates a problem. However, the design of what these developers are intending to do is to pull you up out of the zone that neighborhood is in, to give you to a place where you aren't required to have flood insurance. But yeah, that's one of those ones where people get freaked out. People get worried. I understand they see the news and they see the hysteria of some of these older communities kind of in this pocket of the world. And some of the older communities, especially during Harvey, didn't do great when they didn't basically release the water on Lake Houston over here. A lot of these Kingwoods and Atascocita kind of communities, you see those often on the news where water is actually going into those houses. But that's because a house built in, 1990, 1980 wouldn't have the requirements of Harvey. And so you're at a much greater risk of flooding if you were to go and buy a resale home in a community that was built before Harvey. That's just the facts of it. Houston in general has put in a lot of money to go back after the fact and add flood mitigation. You'll be riding around in different neighborhoods and say, flood infrastructure, and they'll tell you the amount of money that they're putting into it, and you'll just kind of see them work. And that happens as you're just riding around through Houston and the surrounding suburbs. But the reality is a community that was built after Harvey that saw the damaging effects of it and designs a community that puts a bunch of lakes and walking trails and things in the design to already take that on is going to be much better than going somewhere that was a little bit older. Scared yet? Still thinking about coming here? I know a lot of this was purple. I know a lot of this is blue, yellows. You got colors basically everywhere, even in places that you don't see a map or don't see a lake or anything on the map. As you zoom in, you see that it lights up kind of like a Christmas tree. I don't want you to be afraid of that. There's things on our end that we can look at to make sure that you're not buying something that is more flood prone. We would look at, for example, the seller's disclosure of neighboring homes that have sold. We would look at the FEMA maps. We would do everything we had to do to make sure that you're comfortable. But again, there's no one size catch all for everywhere. This section of Ellison and this section of Ellison, one is currently in an old floodplain, one is not. So you can't just assume that because you're in a neighborhood that you're automatically good. Or I'm sorry, this is Bridgeland. You can't just assume that because you're in one neighborhood that you're good. Some of these neighborhoods are so big and acres, 3,000 plus acres big, that by the time you get from one end to the other, that floodplain has changed drastically between the 2 points. So definitely something to look at is one of those top fearful kind of things to come up when I'm doing a consultation with a client. But definitely something to keep in mind is that everywhere is going to have some kind of a risk. As someone that lives down south, there are some extra risks that I incur that people, let's say, up north wouldn't have. So where the people that live up north by all these lakes and little streams and things may have a higher flood risk, when you come down here where we live, we have higher wind and hail. So I pay higher insurance for TWIA. I think it's Texas wind and hail. I can't remember what the insurance and hail insurance, I can't remember what the actual acronym is for, but I pay more money for insurance because basically any storm that would come off the coast, in theory, would probably pass by my house. So that is just an inherent risk that we take on for being this far south. If you go a little bit more north to the Siena area, they don't quite have to pay as much on that insurance, right? So there's trade-offs pretty much with everywhere. Nowhere is perfect. But that's why we would have this kind of consultation together to see what gives you the most peace of mind when we start factoring in things like your relationship to Houston. Do you travel? Do you want to be by water? How afraid are you of flooding? These are the top 4 things that we have to talk about when we're breaking down your house. Now we're going to back out, kind of whole scale a little bit, to talk about some of the other factors, the more hidden factors that we don't really talk about, which is some of like demographics and things. We'll talk about that in the next segment, but we'll back out to the regular map because it's just a little bit easier to see. All right, so now we're going into some of the more hidden, some of the more unknown things about Houston, and what my experience has been and what my clients' experience have been. I've had clients from all kinds of backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, so on and so forth. And one of the things that I have noticed as a trend of just what my touring and what my clients just end up kind of picking is that when someone says, like, what's the diversity like? As you get, Houston itself is one of the most culturally diverse. It has, I think I read somewhere, it has like 50 different languages or something that's spoken here. It's so many different dialects that's spoken here. It's so many different cultures that just live in Houston. And it's one of the things that makes Houston so great. As you move further and further away from the center of Houston, you start to see the diversity numbers just kind of dwindle. That's not uncommon from any, especially in the South, as most of the places in the South are red states and all the major cities and kind of areas are a little bit more blue. That's just the reality of living in the Bible Belt, right? So as a result of that, what you tend to see, just from, again, my experiences, my clients' experiences, and while we're out touring, is that west to south tends to be more diverse, tends to have a more equitable diversity within all groups. As you kind of go more south of I-10 is definitely way more diverse than north of I-10. As you go north of I-10, you tend to see, especially as you get to these communities that are kind of popping up now, the Magnolias, Montgomery, Willis's, this little cone is just way less diverse than what you would see down here, like Meridiana, Siena, over to Jordan Ranch, making your way up to Katy, Cypress. It's just way less diverse. And so what comes with that in Texas is, maybe you don't agree with the messaging of the schools. Let's say if you are more conservative, my more conservative clients tend to want to be more up north because the judges, for example, up there may be more conservative. The schools may be more conservative. They may lean into, certain religious kind of private schools, and a lot of them are up in these areas. Whereas if you're on the southern side of the world, you'll see just generally, again, just more diversity in pretty much all thoughts and all things. And so for, a lot of the sports teams, a lot of the recreational things, a lot of the groups that you'll see out here, it's just way more diverse and way more inclusive. It's not to say that up north it is not that. It is just way less, in my personal opinion. When I'm out touring with clients, out in Katy, for example, or Sugarland, Pearland, out here in Meridiana, I'm way more likely to see a diverse background of people, age, genders, backgrounds, everything, when I'm in this southern cone of the world, south of I-10. Not to say that I wouldn't see it as I go up towards Conroe, Spring, Magnolia, Tomball, any of those places. Not to say that I wouldn't see it. It's just like the frequency at which you see a diversity of age, gender spectrum, everything that you want to see when it comes to diversity is just less frequent. So it's not many places that I would say I feel uncomfortable in Houston. I've grown up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm very aware of what it is like to live in a Bible thumping, very red state, but live in a very blue city. That is how I grew up my entire life, my entire adult life. I was between San Antonio and here, and so I'm very well versed as to what it is like to live in that kind of a climate. And again, I've yet to have a bad experience in any of these places up north. It's not to say that I am uncomfortable anywhere up north. It's just the clients that typically resonate with me and my content, or me and my family. They tend to kind of navigate to stuff that is south of I-10, because in their experiences and in their things that they're searching for is diversity, and where you see most of that is just south of I-10. There's no other way to really slice that. And again, I have clients that are in Spring. I got people building in Spring, Conroe. I got people building in New Canaan right now. Nobody in Tomball, but pretty much everywhere north of I-10, I got some people going. But when getting feedback from people that I've worked with, that's basically what it is. You see, south of I-10 is just way more diverse typically, and going a little bit west. So I would say this little cone south of 290 and making your way down to here is just way more diverse communities that you see. And you typically see that things tend to lean a little bit more conservative up here as you go north. Again, not saying that anything's a bad thing, is what it is. That's just the demographic makeup that you won't necessarily see anyone discuss, and we can act as though everywhere has the same balance of people. It just doesn't. And the reality is this is way less diverse, and it is way more conservative up north compared to being down south. So to add another layer to it, now that we know kind of what the makeup of Houston is, we know that in the center of the city, we basically got an urban hub of a hodgepodge of different houses. As we move out to 8, we're starting to get a little bit more traditional, a little bit more suburban. As we move outside of that to 6, even more so. As we move outside to 99, that's kind of where we are today, with a really big loop that has all the access to all of the really big communities that love, and like, and search on YouTube, and found a person like me to give you a breakdown of. Now we have to add another layer onto that, because the next kind of qualifying thing that is often asked of me is, now that we know about, like I said, location, we know what our relationship is to Houston. Do we plan on being in and out of it? We know our leisure activities, whether or not we want to be close to the airport or we want to be close to water. We know all of those things. The next kind of thing is school. And oftentimes, many of our more desirable communities have a school district that they are tied to. So you'll often see Katy ISD, or you'll see Tomball ISD, or you'll see Cy-Fair ISD. That is the independent school district for that area. And we have some really highly rated school districts throughout the Houston Metro. And it's a benefit that we have, in that if you go into a nice luxury community, there's a high likelihood that your neighborhood is tied to a school district that is super good. Some of the more affluent ones, like I said, Katy ISD usually ranks, top 25 in all of Texas. This one, it says it is number 7 in all of Texas. Tomball, one that doesn't have as many communities up there, probably the most well-known up in Tomball is Amira. And I think that's a Beezer and Perry community, but a top 20 school in all of Texas, Pearland ISD, top 30 school in all of Texas. And so on and so forth. You'll just kind of see that trend happen over and over and over and over again with a lot of our communities. And so you'll just have to kind of wrap your head around, are certain class types important to me? Is diversity important to me? Is the public school infrastructure from elementary to high school, is all of that important to me? Is the sporting important to me? Katie, I believe there's a $70 million high school football arena that was built in Katy for a Katy ISD high school, not a college, but a high school, right? So not all of these things are going to be as great for all things. And niche.com is one of those places. Niche and great schools are probably the two resources that I send people to most often. I typically try not to get into people's school needs. Kind of where I stand is my family made the decision for us that it was better to homeschool. But in terms of resale value and what the overall looks and feel of the neighborhood that we bought in, we would feel comfortable putting our child in that school if we ever decided to do that in the future. And so everybody's needs are different. Some areas are better than others. For example, for kids that have special needs, some are better than others for sports. Some are better than others for having more technical schooling. It really all just depends. So I wouldn't say one school district is better than the other. As we click through some of these tabs on niche.com, let's say right now we're in best district. If we went to most diverse, Fort Bend is one of the most diverse in the whole state of Texas. Ranks top 10 when it comes to diversity. Cy-Fair, also known as Cypress Fairbanks, is top 10 in all of Texas. Katy, top 15 in all of Texas. And that's just on diversity. If we went for athletes, Katy ISD, I just mentioned to you the like $70 million football stadium. Cy-Fair, really big games. And these are a lot of these kids that you'll see that come from this little Houston hub that are playing for all the big schools, your Texas A&M, your UTs, your LSUs. You got kids all over the nation that have come from these big football and basketball schools because competition and things are so fierce out here. And so whenever someone says they are really big into sports, then that tends to push us in a certain direction that may be a little bit different from what the house or the neighborhood that they may have had in their mind, just based on some of the stats that have been provided by some of these resources like great schools. And so finally, let's start talking about some houses. We know the makeup of what Houston is. We know it's an urban sprawl in the middle, kind of a mix up. We know as we get outside of 8, it's a little bit more traditional. We know when we get outside of 6, even more. Out to 99, where we are now, that's where all of our booming master plan communities that have all the buzzword names that your Bridgelands, your Town Lakes, your Dunham Points, your Ellisons, your Cane Islands, your Grange, your Meridianas, your Siennas. All of these names based on your research. Now, let's talk about the actual house itself. Houston is massive. I haven't zoomed in here. You can see that there are, and this is just one criteria. This is showing you that there are over 4,000 houses that are actively listed as new construction over 500,000 in Houston right now. Okay? Over 400,000, or excuse me, over 4,000, over 500,000 for a price point in Houston. Every direction. You see a pin basically in every direction. Okay? As we talk about the kind of house that you want, although there is a lot of new construction everywhere, new construction is not all equal everywhere. We have what is known as kind of one-off new construction, where you have a developer that may have bought a big piece of land and they may put 10 houses on it. You have townhome sort of stuff in the city, where developer again gets a couple parcels of land together, may put up 20 townhomes in the center of the city. Then You have a step up where you'll have a community brought to you by Pulte Homes, brought to you by KB Homes, brought to you by DR Horton, where they are a single developer and they may bring you all of their different product lines at a certain price point, but it's only them in a community. That is its own different category. And we have a lot of those surrounding what I'm working up to. Then you'll have communities that aren't quite planned communities, but are bigger than that community that I just described before. So on the previous one, where it may be just DR Horton, or it may be just Lennar, or it may be just KB Homes, this next segment is like brought to you by Pulte Homes, but there's Meritage, there's Syntex, there's Shea, there's Beezer, there's Perry. They group together, but they aren't quite big enough and don't have quite enough land to get to a point to where they are the final piece and what Houston is most known for, in my opinion, which is being the master plan capital of the world. That is kind of like the pinnacle of what a lot of these big developers are trying to do here. They want it to be eventually a one-stop shop. At some point in time, you won't need to ever leave that community. You'll have hospitals, you'll have schools, you'll have restaurants, you'll have entertainment, and of course, you'll have the communities with all of their amenities. You'll have all these lovely houses. And so the first step is defining what that house looks like. You know, is it an entry level home? Is it 30 to 45 foot wide? That is the typical base standard. So to show you and kind of go over this in depth and to really dig deep, I'm going to take off this pricing category and I'm going to show you the different examples using one of my favorite little pockets of Houston to kind of show you exactly what I mean. So over in this part of the world, this is, we go up in here, we're looking at Ellison. Ellison is probably one of the most beloved communities in the Houston metro, specifically on that part of Katy, because it does a couple great things. It has entry-level products all the way on up to mansions. I have someone over there looking at building in the 80-foot section, and I've closed a few people with some of their more entry-level products from Chesmar in that like 35 to 40-foot wide section. And so they have a great variety that can appeal to all different kind of backgrounds from financial. And then they are tied to one of the best school districts in Katy ISD. That is one of the golden combinations, and it's why it's on the list of one of the top selling master plan communities in the nation, is because you can be a starter home there. At some point in time, you get to a different phase of life. You can get that mid tier and that kind of 50 to 60 foot product line. And then when you're really cooking, you've moved up in the world, you can get into a mansion in the same community, all while having great amenities, all while having multiple pool houses, all while having multiple gyms, all while having all of these commercial restaurants and things come surrounding you. This is one of the gold standards for what it is like to have a really nice house in Katy. If we take a step back, you'll notice that there are neighboring things that aren't in Ellison surrounding it. And that is the beauty of living in Houston, and can also sometimes feel like a curse or a little bit like information overload, is because there's so many damn communities, right? But that's what you got me for. So if you say, hey, Aaron, I don't necessarily need all of that, all of those bells and whistles. I don't need multiple gyms. I don't need to have restaurants at the beginning of my community. I don't need to have a cafe inside. I don't need to have multiple lakes and walking trails. Well, then, okay, we can step it back. We can step it back and say, all right, let's look at a community like Katy Manor around the street, where you can get, over 1,900 square feet for $330,000. For the same exact size house in Ellison, 2 blocks north of this would probably cost you 70 to 100,000 more to get similar size house. So it's a big jump and it's a big difference. The hugest difference between here is this is your only amenity. You're going to have a little park. You might have a little splash pad. You got that little pergola. You might have some walking trails. You're just not getting all that you could get with being in an Ellison versus a Katy Manor. I got family in Katy Manors. They love it. It's enough for them. It's close enough to the HEB. It's close enough to 99 to use all of the infrastructure that an Ellison is playing off of, that a Bridgeland is playing off of, that a Dunham Point is playing off of. It's close enough to and from the premium outlet mall in Cypress. It's close enough to the premium or to the outlet mall in Katy. It gives you everything you need in your surrounding area. You're close to the hospitals. You're still tied to Katy ISD, right? There's benefits and pros and cons to picking one over the other. The biggest sub question that I have to ask my clients when we're in a price point that's kind of straddling the fence on a smaller community versus a bigger community is that the overall appreciation in an area like Katy Manor versus the overall appreciation in an area like an Ellison is going to be vastly different. Even though the price point and the size of homes may be similar in some aspects, the appreciation overall is going to be much greater in a really big community that gives you a wide range of variety, because in that neighborhood we've already seen values 700,000, 800,000, 900,000, $1,000,000 plus in Ellison, whereas in Katy Manor the biggest house in there right now may be 500,000. So that neighborhood long term is capped at half the value of what an Ellison has capped at currently in today's market. So as time goes on, it's just going to take a much longer time for something like this to ever get to 5, 6, 700,000. Whereas we've seen the proof, and there have been documented homes inside of this community that of Ellison that show values that are that high, right? It's kind of like apples and oranges. We eating fruit, but we ain't eating the same fruit at this point in time. So it's definitely something that, depending on your needs, depending on the amenities that you want, depending on the long-term vision of this house, is this a play to get to your next home? Is this your starter home? Is this something that you're going to put something down, making an investment property? Is this something that long term you're just seeing, man, I'm looking at this thing as a play to do something more for me and my family? Then we have to have a conversation about what this exact home means to you today, what it means to you 5 years from now, and what it means to you in the future. Because this kind of relationship between a really luxury community and one that's neighboring it, that's nice but not as luxury, that happens all over Houston. We got examples of that in Katy. If we go over here to Town Lake, we got that same thing with Town Lake, Bridgeland, and let's say, for example, Mason Woods or Marvita, how it wasn't as expensive as Bridgeland, but it has more amenities than Mason Woods. So Mason Woods is kind of capped at a lower value, whereas Marvita is a little less capped because it had the luxury builders, it had the nice amenities, it got the lazy river, it got the gyms, but it was at a lower price point, kind of capped by what Bridgeland was doing, because Bridgeland and Dunham Point and Town Lake and all these other communities that were a little bit nicer do a little bit more. Their values are a little bit capped, right? If we back out and we go and look at let's say a Artavia up here, we got Mavera over here. We have a couple of these kind of like KB home sort of communities, all kind of doing the same thing. You got a really big master plan community that has it all. You got some smaller stuff that's nice, but just not as upgraded as the big one over there. And so that condition happens throughout the entire Houston metro. When you're looking at places like What's another great example of this? Like if you're looking in Jordan Ranch, you have the Fulshire area. They have tons of little. You have a Tamaron community, which is a little bit bigger and has some amenities, but they have another community around the corner that doesn't have any lakes. I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but again, you get the picture. Tamaron would do much better compared to that neighboring community that just has lower values and doesn't have as much amenities from a long-term standpoint. In the right now, yes, you may have some overlap in pricing, but I think long term you're going to see the values of a Tamaron compared to that community just be a little bit less. That condition presents itself over and over and over and over again in Houston. And so, like I said, determining schools, your relationship, your fear of floods, your fear of higher insurance, what you plan on doing, how much you plan on traveling, and then throwing this layer of what type of community on top really starts to narrow it down. And then that last and final layer of how do I truly pick where I want to be from a school or from a location standpoint is to look at what we're talking about when it comes to the actual like house style, right? There's only so many places that build, for example, a 80-foot wide home. You can't get that everywhere. That narrows that down to a very small list. There's only so many places where you can build a 4,000 square foot 1-story home. There's only so many places that you can build a 6,000 square foot 2-story home. Knowing what kind of home that you're looking at, knowing what communities to narrow it down to really drastically shrink that cone from somewhere that feels like thousands of communities. And I know it can feel that way, to narrowing it down to maybe the top 2 or 3 communities that make the most sense for you and your family. But hopefully I haven't scared your ass away. If I haven't, there's going to be a button or a link somewhere on this video to connect with me. It'll probably be underneath, pinned to the top comment, but I would love to go in depth and talk about all the things that matter to you. What do you care about schools? What do you care about diversity? How often are you going to be in and out of Houston? How often are you traveling? Are you trying to be in Galveston? Are you trying to be in Kemah? How are you trying to be in? Are you trying to be in Conroe, Lake Houston? Are you going to be in and out of Austin? Are you going to be traveling back and forth to Dallas? How many times are you going to Louisiana? All of those kind of things play a part in making the best decision. But ultimately, the only way that I can do this for you specifically, is for you to click that link in my bio or in the comments. It's going to be the pinned comment right now. Book a call and let's go over all of you and your family's needs so we can cut down on some of the BS and some of the stress of picking the wrong neighborhood. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have an amazing day.